It is me, Argenbolt. I am hard at work on my first episode of the new visual novel, Volt on the Electromagnetic Planet. In the meantime, there's a few things I want to mention, and not to leave you folks with nothing, I thought I would do something a little on the shorter side. First off, a big thanks to all the folks who signed up recently on Patreon. I greatly appreciate your help. As this is a shorter one, I won't read everyone's names here, but if your name is on screen now, I just want to give a big hearty thanks. I hit my goal, so once again, to all you fine folks who signed up, you make this possible. On to the next thing. Obviously, the next big project is Volt Part 1. But before 2024 comes to a close, I would also like to hammer out at least 1 to 2 big-ass special series videos as well. Now, I'm not 100% sure on what I'm going to do, but look forward to that as well. With all that out of the way, let's move on to the topic of today's video. As you know, I'm a big fan of the Armored Core series. Armored Core is a very cool-ass game where you can build, paint, customize, and fight with your own little robot man. But here's the big secret. For all you folks out there who only started playing AC with AC6, let me let you in on it. You see, min-maxing AC stats and becoming amazing at 1v1s to the point you score in the top echelons and are in an S rank. You think that's it. You think that's the goal. But actually that's kind of lame as hell. Like, come on, it's just Armored Core. It's a game which, by design, will never have the competitive angle of a fighting game. Because also, by design, something like a fighting game has a set of fixed characters which you have to learn to play and master. In comparison, the customization aspect of Armored Core means a lot of the actual combat is what folks refer to as build checking. I.e., you made the Glupshido mech, and I have the gun that kills Glupshido. Don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of fun grinding up the ranks, and in an even fight with two guys with identical builds, it kind of really does become a test of skill. Watching weird AC builds fight is also very funny, but Armored Core suffers from pretty much the intense bell curving of fun. Early on, when you're experimenting, it can be really fun to just mess around with a lot of stuff, and later on, once you've mastered everything, it can also be very fun. But in the middle zone, which is where a lot of people I think end up, there's always just this impression that whatever you're using could be a lot better, and you're just going to be punished for it. It's where the hyper-optimal PvP build writes off a lot of playstyles. Now, on one hand, AC6 in particular has some of the best parts for making a wide variety of approaches viable, which is good. But on the other hand, AC6's stagger mechanics means, as I've said before, ultimately a lot of focus inevitably leads towards just filling up that meter. It's why the dual Zimmerman builds were so strong. You build stagger, stun lock the opponent, then dump big numbers of damage into them and win. So having gone through all of that, what then, Mr. Argenbolt, is the real challenge of Armored Core? It's fashion. It's always been fashion. That's right, spending 8 hours in the graphic design interface to make a cool robot. That is what it's all about. Better yet, to me, nothing is as amazing as a fusion of both. Taking a solidly viable Armored Core mech, which I know is good mechanically, and then making it look furiously amazing. But this then begs the question, what do you make your HD machine look like? If you have the ability to minutely adjust the amount of rust, the metallic reflective pulse of your mech, what do you do? After all, it's a really good question. If you're given what is basically a big Lego box of pre-designed but interchangeable legs, heads, arms, weapons, cores, and so on, how do you do it? What do you do? What paints do you use? One of the most interesting challenges in mechanical design is less an entirely original process and more of a transformative one. In a way, like with all design, you could step back even further and argue that all humans as artists just kind of naturally recombine our favorite designs into new things. Before you can draw a machine from scratch, you must first learn the components, and the only way to learn those components is to look at pre-existing design. So to provide an example of that in action, very cool example, I'll be showing off a complete set of Armored Core 6 designs which I based on Wipeout. Yeah, gotcha, it's a Wipeout video. Growing up, Wipeout, or Whippy Out, was one that left a big impression. A futuristic racing game with killer, sleek graphic design that was finely done. A boppin' techno-trance OST and killer branding. If any game made me excited about seeing the future, it was definitely Wipeout. More than likely, Wipeout also primed me to also later enjoy things like Ace Combat 3 for very similar reasons, but I'm getting ahead of myself a bit. I've been a big Wipeout fan since then, and while never being a master of those games, I love indulging in that finely crafted, sleek, futuristic world. It is a ripe baseline to work with because the mechanical design is already oozing out and wonderfully stylized. When looking at Armored Core 6's garage and knowing I wanted to do a killer series of designs, I initially didn't have a good starting direction. That was until I happened upon @WaveRiderCrush's great tweet. Of course, the Wipeout games had a huge array of designs that were really killer. So, that kind of inspired me to get started. I got to work approaching this as a bit of a pet project. The rough outline was the following. Number 1. Adapt all the Wipeout teams, or the ones that I liked at least, into AC mechs. Number 2. Use the identity of each team to recreate the machine. Recreate the branding, or even fix the branding if possible. Capture the identity as much as possible. Number 3. Adapt all of that, whatever that was, that identity, into some kind of interesting weapons loadout, or something that reflected it. At that point, I hadn't used quite a lot of AC6's builds and possible setups, so it was also to push myself out of my comfort zone, in both gameplay and visual style as well. And number 4. Most importantly, try not to repeat parts as much as possible. Try to make each machine feel somewhat distinct and unique. The following machines are what I came up with. And with that challenge in mind, I'm going to go through each and mention some of the stuff I went with and why I went with it. Hopefully, it inspires your own creative mechanical design pursuits and gives you a few ideas. Triacus. Named after a taxonomic group of sharks, I started here for a few reasons. Firstly, I didn't know if I wanted to do all the teams at this point, or even just most of the teams. So after all, in-universe, Triacus is one of the few military-associated racing teams, so a combat mech was a good fit. As it was also a bit of a punchy brick in those games, it would kind of mesh well here. The other reason I began here was because of something which was a big issue with AC6. Namely what I refer to as the shrinking amount of neutral space on Armored Core designs. Over the years, as game fidelity and design detail has increased, Armored Core, and their mechs really, have had less and less flat, neutral space. For artists, this is a bad thing, because you need, quite a good deal of neutral space to add eye-catching details in this way. It's also why I didn't apply camo to the guns on the Triacus mech, because if I did, it would kind of just overclutter the entire thing. So if it's already all in there, if you already have all these little parts and geometry, adding more doesn't really help. Here though, the huge tank legs were great. The Triacus camo is already built out of sleek little geometric triangles, so doing that in decals in the editor was easy. Then, the tank body's big neutral spaces provided the canvas. The skirt side armor really shows what I mean. For parts, I went with a blocky and militaristic Melander core and head. The Basho arms complemented it nicely, and then big conventional cannons and Gatling guns give it that nice brutish vibe. Some final details are some nice jet fighter warning labels used by some of the later Wipeout series, and it was good to go. Harimau. For the Malaysian eco-friendly team, I indulged in my crippling addiction to orange as a color. Harimau uses a lot of this repeating rouleau triangle kind of branding. Bright oranges, yellows, and teal blues are prominent and eye-catching features. As one of the team's initiatives in Wipeout is to reintroduce the once extinct tiger populations through cloning, cat-like or sharp feline parts were what I went with for this AC. The Alba head in particular, combined with the sharp Firmeza chest, created a great profile. Yeah, I know the head is used by Rusty, and Rusty has the wolf thing, but, wolf to tiger, cat to dog, it's going to be closer than really any other options. The Howl legs also work great for their waist side pylons. Little touches of chevrons and tiger stripes sealed the design here. As for the team motto, to try and make it pop, I layered it with a drop highlight. However, I don't think it worked all that well. But it was worth the experiment at least. While working on it, I also kind of replicated these little Wipeout stylized ship logos and the really cool Phantom Class Racing League logo, the fastest of the later Wipeout games. For the weapons, I went with a dual burst machine gun and Sweet 16 Derringer shotguns to kind of really bring out that close range, fierce tiger feel. Keeping it light on its feet, but very nimble, which is how its Wipeout anti-gravity racing machine also felt. Assegai. The big African team in Wipeout, and another personal favorite, Assegai has a really unique but neat mix of a very olive green with light and dark blue. as it gets its name from an African throwing spear. Using the VP-46 with their spear tip arm points felt like a great fit. For the weapons and general setup, as Assegai is an incredibly nimble defensive craft, a light on its feet missile kite build was my main idea. For the branding, I mostly used a mix of various Wipeout game logos, as they kind of all look great. The repeating arrows of the later ones, or just the repeating lines of the earlier ones. This also wraps back around to the neutral space thing as well. As you can see, the ephemera legs have loads of great neutral space that I took advantage of with this repeating pattern. Now it does warp in some places thanks to the at times overly complex surface geometry, but it generally works pretty well. The head in particular has a great sheen to it with the dark metal, with bright camera eyes kind of poking through. A good design that I'm very proud of. Icarus. Pivoting again from Triacus' heavyweight and Assegai's medium weight, Icarus is one of the first 6th gen lightweight builds I worked with. As in-game, Icarus is a very fast kind of glass cannon. The design I kind of really went with was a shotgun kicker build. The redshift, as the melee weapon, adds this really striking sickle curve to the look as well. If only I could dual mount them, but oh well. To capture the Icarus nimble and light design, also, I went with the Lammergeier arms and the Kasuar legs, combined with the Nactrayer core, and a head I think worked to kind of give it that signature sharp Icarus feel. I must say the orange, pink, white, red is visually very eye-catching. However, this was all I think kind of a weaker design in final execution. Why? Well, it's kind of just that damn neutral spacing problem again. 6th gen parts really lean into a lot of mechanical complexity, especially the lightweight parts, which does on its own look neat, but doesn't leave much room for detailing in a natural or kind of easy way, sadly. I had to really poke around with this one to find spots where it would fit. In the end, larger decals that ignore the gaps work better for, I think, these kinds of designs in part. Goteki 45. Frustrated by the neutral spacing issue, I went with the big Oceanian bulk team. Despite the bright tropical colors, Goteki and Wipeout is another of the kind of very weapon-heavy dual war canoe teams. With that in mind, an all big guns bazooka hover build seemed like a great fit. I think you can probably visually see what I meant by this point. Using the VE-42B hover legs gave me the big yellow war kayak look perfectly, but it also basically gave the best neutral space canvas which I used, for a nice one-off, slightly at angle Goteki logo as a backboard. It worked really well, and I think the bigger parts with their abundance of neutral space made this design one of my strongest and my favorites. Plenty of room for the team motto and lots of little details. It's also a blast to play. Kyrex. Okay, so the next one is neat for a totally different reason. See, this is the in-universe logo for the Russian racing team Kyrex. Only, as you can see, it also uses Cyrillic lettering. What's wrong with this logo? Well, it's bullshit. Not only does the letter Q not exist in Russian at all, but this is Z, which makes, well, a J or Z sound. So in actual Russian, Kyrex isn't Kyrex, it's like Kyrej. So instead I looked into Cyrillic writing and checked with people who understood it and came up with this. The actual way you would probably write Kyrex in Russian. Yeah, the Wipeout games are made by a British studio in the 90s originally, so they didn't really prioritize the Russian language, unsurprisingly. From there, I also edited the team motto a bit. Non-stop revolution ends up being a little too wordy in the actual language, so I just went with permanent revolution. Of course, being a pun on the rotation of a wheel, and something that must have happened in Russia at some point or something. I also started getting into fake corpo branding with this one as well, with some nice fake aerospace companies, and of course, for a Russian team, a gas company. Also, of course, I gave it the purple plasma cannon and the dual AKs to match. How could I resist? Piranha. Piranha is another light, fast, but fragile design, so another lightweight build that maxed out speed above all else was the go-to. Now personally, yellow-red always makes me think of like McDonald's, or like ketchup and mustard, but I wasn't going to mess with the OG team's colors here. This was also the first build I ever did with a dual melee setup as a focus, and going all in on the stagger focus as well. Bite and keep biting is the way to go with this one. Rather than trying to cram way too much, and as with Icarus, I went instead mainly with the nice sleek and simple repeating Piranha fish pattern. I think overall it's an okay design. Mirage. Now I love green on mechs, but I must admit I never really used this Middle Eastern team in the actual Wipeout games all that much. That being said, even there, the insect-like approach meant this time here, I could take advantage of the weirder AC parts and feel pretty comfortable doing so. A quad missile build was a fun setup which could channel that well. In addition to the traditional Mirage team logos, I also took this opportunity to do a stylized Arabic translation of that as well. From there, I also did some new fake company logos on top of it. For a futuristic Middle East, a de-desertification and water reclamation company seemed like a cool fit. One funny thing is the block white text really gives off an Adidas vibe I didn't initially intend, but I don't know, I think it works pretty well. Tigran. Yes, I know these guys didn't show up very long in the Wipeout games, but I wanted another Cyrillic challenge. Their Tiger Flame was a simple and easy to repeat decal, which quickly gave this one of the more, I don't know, I'd say specific identities. As Tigran is a bit of a dirty team, another somewhat cheesy kite build seemed like a good fit. They didn't race clean, they're not gonna mech clean either. Once again, I redid the team motto, but kept it truer to its OG incarnation. The biggest thing I played with is the colors. Sadly, I don't personally really dig either combo all that much, simply because red Tigran veers a bit too much to kind of what I think of as Icarus territory, and black-orange Tigran kind of meshes with Van Uber. But on their own, I think they work quite well. Oricom. Typing the sentence, Oricom is the American anti-grav team from Wipeout is kind of redundant. Saying it is even more so. There is no way to do this with subtlety at all. The Melander core and arms and legs really do strike that Jigen from Gundam main character vibe, and the shade eye even more. I think the robust red, white, and blue really do work quite well. The repeating star and stripe pattern give me a bit of an early US Air Force vibe also. Really, the only downside here is that the build itself is kind of mediocre and without anything spicy or neat about it. But hey, so is Captain America, so I digress. Overall, worked pretty good. Van Uber. Wanting next to spice things up a bit again, I made a fast wheelchair railgun build. As in-game, tank legs don't need to stop to fire heavy weapons like the railguns, this made the kind of a very fun mash-all-the-buttons kind of build, with some pokey drone backpacks for the general long-range prodding. Van Uber's colors are great, and yes, that is partially because they are orange. But also, once again, as a form of tank legs, the larger neutral space available lets you apply more decals and logos and mottos in interesting ways. This has kind of always been true in AC, but with 6 higher detail and really higher geometric complexity, it only feels more true here. This one is also fun to play, and I think looks pretty great. EGX. One of those leftover teams for sure. Like literally in Wipeout, it's made of the remnants of the Chinese and Finnish anti-gravity teams. This one initially was a reverse joint which just kind of sucked. Playing around with it a bit more, I ended up with a melee cancel build, which I think is a little more interesting to play. I think colors-wise, the yellow focus is not bad, but I think the burnt ketchup doesn't really do much for me. The bright blue in combination with that, even less so. The fact that Piranha already does the yellow-red thing so much means it kind of ends up competing for, a finite palette space. Still, I wasn't going to skip on any of the details, so I did some nice fake company branding, some team mottos, and I ended up a lot better, I think, than I started. AG Systems. The Japanese anti-grav design was going to need to really flex what I had learned on the previous designs. Replicating the already fantastic team branding was a must. That, combined with the sleek Mind Alpha legs and knocked arms, VP-44 head, and Kawamori HAL core achieved that very, very well. The dual Aurora build locked in the kind of futuristic vibe perfectly. It feels like the main character of a mecha show. Overall, I don't have much to say beyond I think I nailed this one well, which is, as one of the OG Wipeout teams, really was kind of required of it. The HAL core in particular just has some really amazing room for decals and, just a lot of great little spaces to put stuff on. It's really down to the nice geometry and the size that gives good real estate. It also meant I didn't feel pressured to overdo the legs or arms, which I think lent a lot to the design working overall. This one looks really good in a lot of screenshots. Physar. I wanted to leave this one for last as it's also one of the big OGs that I knew I wanted to knock out of the park. The European Union's anti-gravity team, like AG, has a plethora of dedicated decals that are just kind of perfect already. I think the top-down look of the diagonal Phasar name and the logo with the head really does amazing work with the ephemera core. It all comes together really nicely. An all-EN laser build for that future vibe kind of tied it together. an additional handful of sleek fake logos I cooked up here and there, and that nice dithering pattern locks it in. I do gotta say though, this one is heavily inspired by Wave Rider Crush's one. I think he killed it so well that it basically inspired me to do the series, so I gotta acknowledge his design again here at the end for sure. Well, that's it for this time. It's just a fun little side thing I did to kind of bide you over. I don't expect the VN to be done until maybe the end of next month, so maybe expect another little small thing before then, and that'll probably involve a bit more of what I showed today. Until then, see you around.